All right, diving in again today. You ready for this?
Definitely. Always up for a good deep dive.
Today we're looking at how one particular faith is, I guess you could say, grappling with all the possibilities, and maybe more importantly, the responsibilities, of living in such a hyper-connected world.
Yeah, makes you think.
It really does. And the piece we're looking at today, the Herculean duty of Bahá'ís in the age of technology, really, it just kind of throws down the gauntlet. It pushes us to think about how faith and all this digital stuff, how they actually intertwine.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating how this source frames things. It really puts the Baha'i faith at this kind of crossroads. Like, it goes beyond just saying, okay, how do we adapt all this tech? It's more like engaging with technology is this crucial duty for Baha'is. It's about using all these tools to get a message out there, a message they believe the world needs to hear, like right now.
Definitely sets the stage for a deeper look, for sure. But before we get into the specifics of the whole technology thing, I'm curious about the core message itself. Like, what is it that the Baha'i faith really emphasizes, especially as it's presented in this source?
Well, they highlight three core tenets. The unity of humankind, then there's the establishment of global justice, and this idea of the spiritual transformation of society. And what's really striking is how relevant all of that feels, when you look at what everyone's talking about these days. Climate change, political polarization, the growing gap between the haves and the have-nots. It's like these Baha'i teachings, they're not just some abstract ideas, they're offering a framework for tackling the stuff we're all dealing with, in the real world.
That connection to what's happening right now is really interesting. But so many faiths talk about unity and justice, right? So what makes the Baha'i approach different? What's unique about their perspective on these challenges?
One thing that really stands out is their emphasis on the oneness of humanity. And it's not just about tolerance or, just coexisting peacefully. It's this deeper idea, like recognizing that we're all interconnected, that we need to build a society that reflects that unity. And the source kind of hints that technology, with its ability to connect people across the globe, plays a huge role in making that vision a reality.
Which makes me think about that whole shift, from the traditional ways of spreading faith to what we can do now in the digital age. The source touches on this, contrasting the old ways with the new tools we have. But beyond the obvious, like moving from writing letters to using social media, what are some of the specific platforms or strategies that Baha'is are finding effective? Are there any examples of digital approaches that are really making a difference?
The source gets into a bunch of different strategies, like creating online content that's actually meaningful, engaging in dialogues about Baha'i principles. They even talk about using creative stuff like videos, blogs, art, even music to express those teachings in fresh ways. It's about meeting people where they are online and making those ideas actually resonate.
So it's not just about shouting out a message. It's about crafting it in a way that connects, makes sense. But with so much going on online, all the noise, all the distractions, is it even realistic to think these efforts can really cut through and impact people? I mean, how do they make sure their message doesn't just get lost in the constant flood of information?
And that's where the source's focus on individual initiative becomes super important. It encourages Baha'is to find their own way to contribute, to express their faith authentically online. So you have this personalized approach combined with coordinated efforts as a community. And that seems to be how they navigate the craziness of the digital world.
So it's a balance. Individual voices and collective action. But this whole call to action, it makes me wonder, does this sense of responsibility to spread the faith digitally, does it put more pressure on individual Baha'is, compared to followers of other faiths?
That's an interesting question for sure. The source, it actually draws a comparison to people of other faiths, how they actively share their beliefs. It's almost like a gentle nudge, for Baha'is to maybe step up their game in the digital world. And I think it comes from their belief that in this age where we're all so connected, it's a unique opportunity to actually make their vision of unity a reality.
It's like they're saying, hey, we have this message, it's important, and now we have the tools to reach the entire planet. It will almost be irresponsible not to use them.
Yeah, there's a definite sense of urgency in the source. Like they're saying the tools are here, now's the time, and it's up to each of us to act.
That idea of individual action, it really hits home for me. I often feel, overwhelmed by how big these global issues are. But if sharing a quote online or starting a conversation, if that can actually create a ripple effect, it feels, more manageable, even empowering in a way.
And that feeling of empowerment, that seems to be exactly what the source is trying to tap into. It highlights this idea that every action, no matter how small, it contributes to this larger goal. building a more unified world. It's a vision where millions of people encounter the name Bahá'u'lláh and this message of unity simply because individuals are taking the time to share it.
It's a beautiful thought. But I don't know, I have a hard time picturing this sometimes. The internet can be a pretty cynical place. What would it take to actually make that vision a reality, to make a message of unity actually break through all the negativity?
That's where things get interesting. The source doesn't offer a simple solution. It's more about cultivating a way of being online, one that reflects the Baha'i teachings.
So it's not just about the content they share. It's also about how they engage, the tone they use, how they actually interact with people online. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. It's about embodying the principles of unity and justice in their online interactions, even when there's disagreement or even hostility. Combine that with using digital tools creatively, and that seems to be their approach to getting their message to resonate.
So it's about walking the walk online, not just talking the talk.
Yeah.
But does the source give any specific examples of what that looks like in practice?
Well, it emphasizes the importance of dialogue, like respectful dialogue, even when you're discussing things that could be controversial. It's about framing discussions in a way that highlights common ground and shared values, even with people who see things differently.
So it's about building bridges, not walls.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But is that enough to really make a difference? To actually change the overall tone of how we talk to each other online, which, let's face it, can be pretty negative?
Well, that's a question that goes beyond what this source talks about, but it does raise a really important point. How do we, as individuals and as communities, use our voices online to help create a more positive, constructive environment? It's a challenge for everyone, not just the Baha'i faith. It's something we're all wrestling with in this digital age.
You're right. It's a challenge we all share. This deep dive, it's really given us a lot to think about. And clearly, figuring out how to navigate this whole digital world is an ongoing process. We're all learning as we go. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, it's that sense of urgency that really jumps out at you when you read this. It's not just some theoretical discussion. It's a call to action, a challenge to, really embrace what this digital age has to offer.
And the way they frame it as a responsibility, it's almost like they're saying it would be a disservice to their faith, to their teachings, not to use these tools to their full potential. But the internet, it can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it connects us in ways we never could before, but it also creates all this space for negativity, division, hostility. How does the source address that? I mean, the potential downsides of putting yourself out there online.
It doesn't really dive deep into the specific challenges you might encounter online, but it does stress the importance of approaching those interactions, with a spirit of unity and respect. It talks about thoughtful dialogue, even on topics that could be seen as controversial. And it suggests framing things in a way that emphasizes what we share, what we have in common, even with people who have totally different views.
So it's more about trying to build understanding than, winning an argument or scoring points. But does the source offer any actual guidance on how to deal with those tricky situations, where a conversation starts to get heated or even hostile? How do they recommend staying respectful and keeping that sense of unity when you're faced with online negativity?
One thing they highlight is the importance of language, being mindful of the words we use online, avoiding inflammatory stuff or personal attacks. It's more about communicating your ideas clearly and respectfully. They also talk about active listening, really trying to understand where the other person is coming from, even if you completely disagree with them.
It's about remembering that there's a real person on the other side of the screen, right? With their own feelings and experiences, not just a username or an avatar. But isn't there a risk that taking that approach could be seen as passive or overly cautious? How do you balance the need to be respectful with the desire to passionately advocate for what you believe in?
The source suggests that this approach isn't about being passive. It's about consciously choosing to engage in a way that reflects those core Baha'i principles. Seeing online interactions as opportunities to actually demonstrate those principles in action.
It's about leading by example, showing that you can have strong opinions and disagree without resorting to personal attacks or negativity. But even with the best intentions, sometimes things escalate. Does the source offer any advice for those situations? When it feels like respectful dialogue just isn't possible.
They recommend disengaging from conversations that become unproductive or harmful. It's like they're saying, look, you're not obligated to respond to every comment or criticism. Sometimes the best thing to do is just walk away from a conversation that's become toxic.
Yeah, that makes sense. Knowing when to walk away and choosing to focus your energy where it can actually be productive. But shifting gears a bit, I'm curious about the bigger picture here. The source talks about the ripple effect of individual actions. But how do they actually measure the success of their online efforts? Is it about likes and shares? Or are they looking at something deeper to gauge how effective their digital outreach is?
The source doesn't really get into specific metrics or anything. It seems more focused on the long game. You know, the long-term impact of consistently embodying those principles of unity and justice in the digital world. It's about planting seeds, fostering connections, contributing to a gradual shift in the overall tone of online discourse.
So it's about changing the way we talk to each other online, not just about achieving some immediate result that you can measure. It's a more subtle approach, but potentially very powerful.
Exactly. And it's something that has implications way beyond the Baha'i faith. What we've been talking about, this idea of using the internet to build bridges and create understanding, those are principles that anyone can apply, whether you're religious or not.
It's about recognizing that the digital world isn't separate from the real world. It's all connected. And how we interact online has real consequences, both positive and negative. This source is encouraging us to be mindful of that and to use our voices online to contribute to a better world, a more connected world.
I think you've really hit on the heart of the source's message. It's not just about promoting one specific faith. It's about using the power of the internet to create a more just world, a more compassionate world, a more connected world.
This deep dive has given us so much to think about. And it's clear that learning to navigate the digital world is an ongoing journey, one that requires us to constantly reevaluate how we're doing and make adjustments as we go. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, okay, let's kind of bring it back to this deep dive and wrap up what we've been talking about. We started with this piece, the Herculean duty of Baha'is in the age of technology. And wow, it got us thinking about how a faith can actively, really actively engage with the digital world. It wasn't just about adapting. It was more like seeing this whole moment in history as an opportunity, almost like a responsibility.
You hit the nail on the head. That responsibility element, it was front and center. The source made it crystal clear that, these advancements in tech, they're a golden opportunity for the Baha'i faith to spread their message, but it's not just a free-for-all. It comes with this deep sense of responsibility to use these tools the right way.
And it went beyond the nuts and bolts too, right? Like how to use social media, how to create content. It tied everything back to those core principles of the Baha'i faith. Unity, justice, spiritual transformation. Those ideas were kind of woven through every suggestion, every point the source made.
Exactly. And it's those core tenets that make their whole approach to digital engagement so fascinating. It's not just about broadcasting their beliefs, it's about living them out online.
That emphasis on action, on actually doing something, it really stood out to me. Remember how the source kind of compared them to other faiths and how actively they share their beliefs? It wasn't meant as a criticism, but it felt like a subtle push, for Baha'is to really step up and embrace this moment with the same energy and dedication.
Oh, yeah. That sense of urgency was definitely there. It felt like they were saying, look, this is a turning point. The tools are here. The world is connected. The time to act is now.
And they didn't just leave us hanging either. They offered some practical steps, using social media in a meaningful way, having these thoughtful dialogues, even using creative stuff like art and music to spread the message. It was all about being proactive, about finding ways to connect with people right where they are online.
And it wasn't just about quantity, about reaching the most people possible. It was about the quality of those interactions, too. Respect, listening to each other, finding that common ground, even when you disagree. It was all right there in the source.
That whole focus on building bridges instead of walls, that really resonated with me. It felt like such a needed counterpoint to how toxic things can get online. But it does make you wonder, how do they measure the impact of these efforts? It's a long game, and the internet, well, it's crowded, it's noisy. How can they be sure their message is really breaking through?
Yeah, that's the tricky part. They didn't really get into specifics about measuring results, about numbers and metrics. It seemed more about that ripple effect, about constantly reflecting those values of unity and justice in every interaction they have online.
So it's more about shifting the tone of the conversation, not just about some immediate outcome that you can measure. It's subtle, but wow, potentially really powerful.
Exactly. And it's an approach that has implications for all of us, not just the Baha'i faith. What we've talked about today, this idea of using the internet to build understanding, those are principles anyone can use no matter what they believe.
It all comes back to remembering that the digital world, it's not separate from the real world. It's all part of the same fabric. How we behave online, it has real consequences, good and bad. And this source is encouraging us to be aware of that, to really use our voices online to make the world a better place, more just, more connected, more compassionate.
Beautifully put. You captured the essence of it perfectly. It's not just about one faith. It's about how we can all use this incredible tool, this power of the internet, to build a better future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This deep dive, it's really given us a lot to chew on. And it's clear that navigating this digital landscape, it's an ongoing process. We're all learning as we go. But hey, that's what makes it so interesting, right? So until next time, keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and keep diving deep.